Hi, everyone. My name is Jackie. I'm your event host this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I have the pleasure of introducing our lovely guests this evening. So just a little bit about them before we get started. I know you're probably all eager to jump right in. But joining us tonight are best-selling historical fiction authors Susan Meissner, Beatriz Williams, and Heather Webb. I'm going to just go through a little bit of their bios, although I'm sure you all know all about them. Susan is a former managing editor of a weekly newspaper and an award-winning columnist. We're thrilled to celebrate her newest release, Only the Beautiful, which has been described as an emotional journey of grief, hope, and second chances. So this is one certain to resonate with all of us. Joining her is Beatriz, the best-selling author of 13 novels, here to discuss The Beach at Summerley, which is a perfect combination of historical events, summer romance, and suspense. So those are all my favorite things. So I can't wait to hear more about that one. And last but certainly not least, we have Heather Webb, the USA Today best-selling and award-winning author of 7 historical novels, here to celebrate Strangers in the Night, which dives into the tumultuous romance of Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner. So definitely another must-read. We're in great company tonight, so I know you're all excited to hear what they have to say. We will have audience Q&A, so you can save up your questions for when they get to that part of the presentation, and then we'll have a signing line as well on the other side of the store after the event. So if you haven't gotten to get your copies of the books yet, we'll have them available at registers for you after the event as well. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just realized we don't really have a moderator, so we're just gonna have to do this. I'm thinking, let's premise we have controversy. Who's going to moderate this? I don't know.
So I was a high school teacher for a decade, so I think I got this.
Beatriz, please tell us about how you So we already knew now. I was here at the end of June to introduce The Beach at Summerley to the world. So for those of you who are here, I will not rehash that very long part. And I will just sort of say that The Beach at Summerley is a combination of 2 things: my own obsession with, my current obsession with Cold War, and my editor's imperative that I write a summer novel that will sell lots of books. So I was like, I've got an idea. What if I set a Cold War spy thriller on Winthrop Island, which is my loosely inspired by Fisher's Island, which is not too far from here. I initially wrote about my Winthrop Island, wink wink, in The Summer Wives. It is loosely inspired. It's not, I don't want any Fisher's Islanders to be like, but you have a hill there where there's no hill. And I'm like, well, that's it's fiction. But I love it. I found it such a fascinating culture, and I thought it would be an interesting place to tell a story about a spy inside this world that's very, we're talking about families who come year after year, same houses, very few houses ever go on the market on Fisher's or on Winthrop Island. And so what happens when you have that kind of very close-knit community? You also have internal, very subtle frictions between the year-round population and the summer population, which is wealthier, obviously, different social class, but we're in New England, so we try to be very egalitarian about it. But on the other hand, the differences are there and they're real. So what happens when right after the end of the Second World War, someone arrives on the island who is in fact operating a secret radio that is transmitting vital information about the United States atomic weapons program to Moscow Central, the KGB. Well, it was not quite yet the KGB, but became the KGB headquarters in Moscow. And this story is told through the eyes of Amelia Winthrop, who is a daughter of one of the oldest families on the island. Her father is now a caretaker for one of the wealthy summer people on the island. And it's sort of told through her eyes as she is forced to make a choice between this family and the people she loves who are inside that family. and helping the FBI find its spot. I mean, usually that's like 30 minutes of a talk. I boiled that down 30 minutes, but it is something.
It's got 400-page book.
But and all the sort of history and stuff behind it. But it was also the history part of it based on a real story I read that took place in the suburbs of London. Young woman, couple moves in next door, they become close friends, and then she ends up having to betray this woman who is in fact a spy for the Soviet Union. I thought, what a great coming of age, but also conflicted loyalties, but you get the politics, and she kind of comes back later and tries to meet with this woman and get closure, and the woman's like, you betrayed me, I'll never forgive you. She's like, whoa, great, there we go, no closure, but closure in a way. So I love that combination of history and the very, very personal.
Can I answer the same question?
You should.
Gosh, it is hard to encapsulate a book in just a few minutes, but I can say that Only the Beautiful is about two women who were impacted by a movement that we don't hear much about anymore. It was called the eugenics movement, and it was really big, mainstream in the early part of the 20th century. And eugenics is not a word we talk about anymore either, but what it means is good genes. So the Greek prefix EU, you, means good. If you go to a funeral and you hear a eulogy, it's good words.
It's Succession.
What's that? Oh, yeah, that's Succession. So eugenics means good genes. And I came across a photograph when I was researching a different book. I was writing a book about the San Francisco earthquake. And I came across a photograph of a booth in the 1915 World's Fair, which San Francisco hosted only 9 years after that devastating quake and fire. It was a eugenics booth, and it was the race betterment booth. And I saw that, and I thought, what in the world does that mean? Race betterment booth sounds like something out of Nazi occupied Europe. And so I knew I would probably go back to that and do a research dive to see what that was. I've always had my nose to the ground when it comes to research with historical events. And I found out the eugenics movement was very popular in the 1910s and 20s and 30s here in the States. And the idea was if we could just control the gene pool, if we could have happier, healthier, better children, then you'd have a happier, healthy, better society. And the way those thinkers executed that plan was to control who could have children and who couldn't. And basically, if you were in a state institution, and if they felt like you aren't the kind of person you want to have propagating, then we're going to sterilize you before we release you. And so the United States sterilized a great many people under the eugenics movement. And actually, Adolf Hitler was very interested in what we were doing here, sadly, in the 1910s and 20s. And he wrote to our eugenic leaders and said, what are you actually doing about this? We're sterilizing people so that they can have children. And he wanted to hear more about that. And you know what he did. He took that ideology to its worst limit. And so the book is about two different women impacted by that movement. A 17-year-old orphan girl who has a rare sensory anomaly called synesthesia, which I can tell you about later. If you want to know, you can raise your hand and laugh. And we'll talk about it. She has a rare sensory anomaly that actually puts a target on her back. We're talking 1939, height of the movement. And also someone who she's distantly related to, who was a nanny working as she's an expat working as a nanny in occupied Vienna. And she's helping to take care of a disabled child in occupied Vienna in the 1930s, 1940s. And so their two lives are going to collide over this movement. And parts of the book I know are very sad. I know that. But it's historical fact. And I felt like I had to honor the history of that event. I mean, if we're going to remember, we need to remember the eugenics movement. If we don't remember it, we're going to forget all the lessons that came out of it.
Back,
right? So,
kind of does anyway.
It does anyway.
Do you swat it down or do you let it through?
I'm hoping that if we write stories about the past and you read them, then we hold on to the past for a little bit longer. But I want you to know that even though there are parts of the book that are sad, it was important to me to give you an ending that's life affirming. That was really important to me. So I feel like even though if you go on this ride with me, you're going to go back to the part of the past is a little difficult. In the end, we will see that. Yeah, well, even though there are really hard, difficult people in the world. There are also good people in the world, and they're there too. And they show up in this book.
And all my books to this. So, hi, I'm Heather, and so the book I'm talking about is Strangers in the Night. So, this book, actually, my publisher reached out to me and said, we have this idea, and we would really like for you to write it. And I thought, I haven't been doing a lot of biographical fiction lately, and so I sort of penned and hawed just for 5 minutes, because it was Frank Sinatra, and said, my parents were Italian Americans from Chicago, and their parents were from Sicily. And I just thought this would be a really interesting and cool way to dig into their past and connect to it sort of sideways, and look at someone who they admired and all of the musicians around Frank in that whole era. So I said yes, and had no idea what I was getting into. Frank was larger than life. He's not just one of those figures that stands out in history as someone you should know about. He's not just a legend, he is an aesthetic. You go to restaurants, you go to any place that wants to sort of be highbrow. What are they playing? They've got Frank Sinatra in the background. It's a thing. He created something that he didn't know that would go way, way, way beyond who he was. He was a very, very flawed human being. And so was Ava Gardner, who, as it turned out when I started the research, I kind of wanted to ditch him and just focus on her because she was brilliant and funny and earthy and interesting. She rejected convention, rejected all the traditional mores that Frank was raised under in lots of ways. So there, you bring the two together and you have dynamite. And you see that in this book. It's very much about the passion they're drawn, the passion they have for each other and for their careers. It's about old Hollywood and the studio system and how crazy that was, by the way. If you ever have gotten into the history of that, what it looks like, it's very, very different from today. And it's kind of about lasting love too, at the end of the day. So again, a very tumultuous ride through their story, but this is what this book is about, and it was great fun to research, very inspiring, and yeah, I think there's some tears in the end. So at least I hope. And yeah, so this is what the basis of the story is about, Strangers in the Night. So I think we should talk a little bit about research, because as historical writers, this is our bread and butter. We love this. We are nerds at heart. I show up. Beatriz is like neck deep in the research section here at RJ Julian. I'm like, she's like, I have to get this research book for my next book. And she's in there.
I'm not getting the book that I was planning to get because I was like, oh, actually, this would be good airplane reading. So, no, but it's still nonfiction.
Yeah. So let's hear about what did you do for research for this book? Like, what did you have a plan?
Well, I had something done a lot of research about the Cold War for my earlier book, Our Women in Moscow. And if you've read that book, there is one of the main characters in that book does appear in The Beach separately. That's one of my favorite things to do. And if you know who it is, when that person appears on the island, we're like, uh-oh, trouble. So I love doing that. So I had already done I already sort of had mapped out in my head, I'd already done all this sort of research on the background for Winthrop Island. So I would love returning to that and the families that I had created, a few of them religiously inspired by real families and stories I'd heard about very much on the down low. Because if anyone finds out that anyone spilled the beans on Fisher's Island, they'll be like blackballed. So I had to kind of like tease a few stories out here and there. But so that part of it was done. Cold War I'd already done so much, such a deep dive for Our Women in Moscow, which was sort of loosely inspired by the story of the Cambridge spy ring. So I had never written a spy book, a true spy book before. I did a lot of fiction reading, you know, the early John le Carré until I kind of got a bit fed up with him. You know, that there's not a lot of like well fleshed out women characters in the book, other than like literally fleshed out in the flesh. Right. Yeah, so women only had a particular purpose for him, certainly in the early years. So I did a lot of fiction and just to kind of discover the conventions of that early Cold War spy novel. I did kind of reading about the history of Russia and the revolution and life in Soviet Russia. And I did obviously the Cambridge spies and their stories, and then just technical stuff about spycraft and just how spying takes place certainly within the context of the Cold War. Even though the espionage part for me was like, that's like the choreography. It's not what interests me as much as like the people and psychology. That to me is the sweet spot. Well, for example, and this was a question that I addressed in Our Women in Moscow and came back to address in this book, which is something that really fascinates me, because knowing what we know now about Soviet Russia, particularly under Stalin, those, you know, the late 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and the scale of human tragedy that was happening there, and the useful idiots in the West who came over and said, "Oh, really? It says workers' paradise, and it's done such a great job," you know. And meanwhile, you know, purges, you know, thousands, millions of people dying, you know, Ukraine, the famine, and so all this is taking place. And yet these people, you know, young people, idealistic, are taken in by this idea of communism, that it leads to human liberation instead of human misery and repression. And they hang on to this idea, despite all the evidence to the contrary, and continue to justify what they're doing. They don't renounce what they've done. They don't at any point have that moment of revelation, like, oh, maybe I'm on the wrong side of history. Is it possible that I am wrong? And they can't admit, and they cling to this so hard. And to me, the psychology of spying is fascinating, like what it does to you as a person, and the difficulty of leading a double life and deceiving your friends and your colleagues and your family and people you love. The psychology of the family who discovers that this person has been betraying them all this time, the friends who discover this person's been betraying them. But particularly in the context of the Cold War, and particularly in the context of the deep cover agent in the West. There's no such thing as a Soviet Union, because in a police state, you can't really have a deep cover agent because everyone's already informing on each other. So, you know, this is something that can happen in the West. You have this deep cover agent. And how does this person continue to do what they do in spite of all the evidence that they're supporting a regime that is a murderous tyranny? And that to me was the real nugget of psychological truth that I've spent now 2 books trying to get to the heart of. Christ doesn't solve it, but that's like the real heart of my research project, is figuring out what is going inside the heads of these deep cover agents.
I resonate with that, because when I was studying eugenics, the leaders who were totally behind it were like really smart people, doctors, sociologists, anthropologists, especially medical doctors, and they thought they were on the right side of history.
Absolutely. And some of them, I mean, many of the eugenicists were feminists. Yeah. They were, you know, it's very problematic for us to sort of look. I actually, Anne Leary had a book out last year. Yes, I wrote the review for that at the Times. I really thought it was fascinating. It was a subject that had not been covered, and she did a very good job of it, and just kind of getting to that very uncomfortable thing that people, that it was progressives who in many cases were leading the eugenics movement.
I think they weren't seeing it. They weren't seeing, where does this thinking take you? If you keep at it, where are you going to end up?
Yeah, exactly.
Where's it going to take you?
Yes.
And the thing about the eugenics movement is it's not that we don't want children to be born healthy. We all want to have healthy children, okay? It's not that. It's that if you are the parent of a child who is not born with what we would say the normal amount of digits or whatever, is you don't degrade their humanity. That it's like they're no less human if they're born with less ability than you or I, or a heightened ability. There's intrinsic human worth that everybody possesses, no matter what you're born or not born with. And so to sterilize someone to say, we don't want any more people like you, is pretty much what they were saying. We don't want you, is exactly what Hitler said when he started his regime of race denial.
And just another iteration of the means justified. Right. Sorry, the end justifies the means.
And our 14-year-olds are here in high school, by the way. The same kind of, we don't want to see anybody like you. It feels very juvenile, this sort of thinking.
Yeah,
like
it's kind of
being stunted in this
playground.
Yeah. And they were very good at co-opting science to back up their beliefs, taking
what they wanted,
taking what they wanted, cherry picking, and sort of coming at the science with a conclusion already, rather than letting the science lead them to the conclusion. They found the science to support the conclusion, and but I found it. It's such a meaty, rich subject.
You can't,
there's so much moral ambiguity.
Yeah, you can't discover it all in one book. Yeah. So what themes arise out of?
I'm nowhere near. I'm in a different light here. So the research for Frank and Ava was, I spent, of course, lots and lots of biographies. There's a million about Frank. There's about a dozen about Ava, which I also read, and visited the Ava Gardner Museum in Smithfield, North Carolina, if anyone's been there.
Where's
and actually,
is that what
it's an hour from Raleigh.
Okay.
So my parents are in Raleigh.
Because my daughter's in college there. So.
North or south?
You don't follow the GPS. I
did.
You know,
yeah, my parents live in Raleigh, so I've been a few times. Yeah, and they're actually celebrating 100 years of Ava Gardner, and there's a big festival happening in the next couple of weeks. I think maybe even this weekend. So my research is quite different. A lot of reading. I have a sister in Hollywood who has toiled in the trenches. So I get some insight for 20 years. So I get some inside information there. But also, I went out to Palm Springs and visited Frank. And the time was not great. Really? I expected a Napoleonic. Has anyone visited Napoleon in Paris? Yeah. It's 7 stories. There's all these, it's enormous. It's one tomb inside another, and every single layer is a different type of marble and stone. Frank, it's one little tiny little headstone in the ground. It was shocking. Lots of empty Jack Daniels bottles all around. I did bring some myself to donate to the cause, but I just really, even Ava Gardner, she has a small headstone, but there were lots of flowers and things around her. She's very well loved in Smithfield. Nonetheless, so I spent time, reading and visiting these places, watching their films, yes. Listening to Frank being interviewed. He has this voice, and I decided that I had to make a choice about perspective in this book, and the most important way to sell this story was to settle into the voice. And so I wrote it from dual first person perspective, which was not easy. I started in third, thinking this is more literary, distance, can look at, it didn't work. I couldn't get close enough. I switched to first person, and all of a sudden I could not turn them off. At night in bed, I could hear them. I could hear Frank. I can still hear Frank. And so I wrote the book in dual first person. I do alternate between both of their perspectives, and a lot of the films and the interviews really helped me hear them and feel them. So they're much closer in time than what they're talking about. There's a lot more material. So not only just them, but they knew everyone, literally everyone. So every time in Hollywood, in politics, So I'm writing a scene, and then there's Lana Turner, and there's Humphrey Bogart, and there's Laura Bacall. So I'd be like, okay, would they be there at this point in time? What did they sound like? What were they doing? You know, what was their career? So I'd have to stop and then research their lives as well. So I was 6 months behind in turning this book in because the research was very intense. I'm not sure I would write something so close in history again, especially as a biographical, but like I said, I was approached to write it. So I tried to give it my all, and I'll tell you, it was very, very intensive. But I loved it, and it made me cry. And every time I got through another draft, I still cried. So I hope it makes me cry. So any last little things that you wish you could have included that you didn't? And then we're going to talk about what we're working on next.
Included and didn't. Well, I think, I think you've done your job, certainly research-wise, and I hope as a storyteller. If 90 to 95% of what you know about this historical period isn't actually in the book, at least not stated. I try to never do explainers, because explainers stop the action. They stop the story. They pull you out of the story. So I try to relate the story as if you're living there with them, that they're telling you the story, and as someone would who does not consider herself to be a character in a historical novel. My characters consider themselves to be contemporary because they are. So I would say that, I think there was, the challenge for me was to have this novel that is set on this summer island, primarily with a later part set off the island and in Washington. There's a negotiation that's taking place. And to convey the stakes. And the stakes are, what a monstrous regime was in place in Soviet Russia at the time, and B, the fact that these there were Soviet agents inside the U.S. atomic weapons program. In fact, one of the Cambridge spies was one of them. He had a seat on the U.S. Atomic Energy Council and was sending all the minutes back to Stalin. So the fact that Stalin, who is one of history's greatest murderers, is privy to all our atomic weapons information, to kind of convey all that without ever drawing the reader out of the story. So there were a lot of details that I wanted to put in those. I can't, it just doesn't fit in the story, but I hope that it encourages people to at least do a Google search.
Yeah, that's exactly. Our goal, isn't it? Right.
Exactly.
Go to Google and look up more.
Yeah. But still, convey the stage so that you realize why this is so new.
Yeah, one of the sections in my book is about this nanny who's taking care of a disabled child. I don't think this is a spoiler, but it falls on her to devise a plan to help get disabled children out of Nazi occupied Vienna because they've been targeted for euthanasia, as they called it. The Nazi regime called euthanasia. They were rounding up and killing disabled children. It appalls me to say it. I'm sure it's appalling to hear it, but it really happened. Before Hitler built any of those concentration camps, whose names you know, he did this. He rounded up disabled children and he killed them under eugenic thinking. And I wanted to find somebody who actually did that, who rescued children out of that. And I couldn't find anybody because I wanted to, let's say, borrow from their methods to give those methods to my character so it would ring true.
Yes.
So when somebody asked me, so what your character did somebody actually do that? I could say, yes. And they rescued, however many children. I could never find that person.
I'm sure it's out there.
I have to think that it's out there, that somebody did do that. And maybe their story didn't get told. Yes. Or maybe they felt like a lot happened. Yes. Or maybe they felt like
the negative gets recorded sometimes instead of the positive.
Yeah.
So
and if somebody's out there doing this, they would want to keep quiet.
And maybe they just didn't. They didn't survive.
Yeah,
and they didn't survive. So I had to make it up. I had to guess. Well, okay, if they were going to try and ferret disabled children out of occupied Austria, how would they do it? So I guessed, and I was never able to like verify. Could it have happened that way? I think it could have happened that way. I hope it did, but I
might go with you.
Okay.
Research I left out, so a lot. I cut 100 pages, in fact, which I'm a very deliberate writer, so that's incredibly unusual for me. I tend to write a sort of a meager first draft, and then I layer. But this time, I put everything in there because there was so much. I had to cut Frank's relationship with JFK, and then his subsequent relationship with the Reagan administration. There was a lot about Ocean's 11 that was in there. It was really interesting. I did put a little bit. I cut a lot about Ava. She was one of the mega stars of her day, like Angelina Jolie, Jennifer Aniston level. And what's so sad is, you know, Ava Gardner, okay, maybe I've heard of her. I'm not sure if I could pick her out of a lineup. One of the most beautiful women to walk the earth and incredibly talented on top of that. But she was mega, chased in the streets by whores in Brazil, and many, many places. In fact, Italy, all over Europe. She knew Juan Perón of Argentina. He was in the same building as her. Just so many things that I had to cut, those fascinating tidbits, because it just, like you were saying, Beatriz, it bogs down the narrative. You have this point you're trying to drive towards.
Yes.
And if you don't want to drive there, your publisher's like, you're going there. So you have to take out some of that stuff, but lots and lots of great information. I think I'm pretty sure I listed sources. If not, I'm always happy to share that for people who want to know more information. But we learned so much, and then we just sort of cherry pick what helps support.
But I think everything you learn finds its way to the fabric of the book. It's inside and between the lines. It's not. It's just the way it informs who the characters are, and how they talk and act and relate, and it's all kind of and it just the period itself. And just conveying that sense of period without long explainers.
Yeah,
it's there. It's just not.
Like Frank, I didn't realize he'd tried to commit suicide several times. Who knew? This is one of those things that, his daughter, who wrote a really beautiful memoir, by the way, My Father's Daughter. I read it a couple of times, actually made me cry. She talks about how there was a pill for that today. It's not a pill for that, it's a manic depressant. So there are these interesting tidbits that, you kind of filter in through the lines, and you can absorb it through the reading. You can go, okay, this person was clearly, they needed something. Better reading through chemistry that we get today, right? They did not have it in, but you can feel it and you can see it, but we have to take out some of that because it will just really drag the story down. So, ladies, we are always perpetually in motion. What is on the horizon? So this is your paperback release, right?
No. The Beach Simile was out in June, so we're not. I'm not actually releasing this second.
Okay, so
what time? So I'm sure that paperback will be out.
This is like super juicy, but.
Yeah. So no, my next book will be out next summer. We don't have an exact release date yet, but I can't tell you the title because we finally decided on a cover. So actually, if you're following my social media, now would be a good time to pay attention because I hope to be able to release all that stuff very, very soon. And it is also set on Winthrop Island. And I actually wrote this book like a year ago, because I was with publishers and I needed to have a really good, chunk of it ready to show, new perspective. Process. So I had to at least, I actually wrote most of the story last summer, early fall. And so it's for me, I've been living with this for a while and I put a lot into it, this, new publisher and everything. It's actually set on Winter Island again, but it is a large part of the book is set in the. I know. So. One of the things my readers love is sort of seeing like whatever happened to so and so, and so we get to see some of that. The main character in Summerlee appears briefly in a cameo. She's in her late 90s, and Summerlee is actually in the book The Estate, and some of the families that you meet in Summer Wives. There's the main part of it juggles between 2008 and 2022. But there's also a DNA imperative in this book, and that leads our main characters to the story of the grandparents interestingly, in Egypt in the winter of 1951 to 52. As the seeds of revolution are starting to sprout, or I should say the sparks are beginning to fly. The great fires of Cairo in January 1952. And it was interesting because so much of the research is on the situation that they decided, like, oh my gosh, here we are again, again and again and again. And so that was, I actually loved the characters in the whole book so much. And, but there is a very, just a really big love story in that main narrative. So you just I know, I'm still getting over this guy. Right now, I'm still in love. Just a big love story. I just wanted to go back to that Cold War love story thing that I just love so much. So yes, very big love story, but also really there's a lot of threads going on in there, but also this, for those of you who read me for the historical part, there is history, and a part that you don't actually know about. So I'm excited to bring that to all.
That's exciting. Oh, gosh. Well, my next one doesn't have a title yet, and it won't come out until probably early 2025. But it's also Cold War, and it's set in the late 1950s. And I was thinking, after so many World War II books, and I know you probably read a lot, I've read a lot, they've all been wonderful, but I thought maybe now people will be wondering, well, what happened after that? Like, what were the 1950s like? And you would think they would be a time of great peace and relaxation, because the horrors of the war were done, and the dust was settling from all of that. But the 1950s were actually quite scary. It was the Cold War, and it was the beginning of the Cold War, and no one really knew what the USSR was capable of. And the Red Scare was a real thing, and McCarthyism was a real thing, even if it was unfounded. It was real. It characterized that decade. And so it's a book about displacement, when it feels like the place that's always been home for you has been taken from you, or is being threatened with being taken from you, like your sense of belonging. Like, if you've ever had the rug pulled out from underneath you, you kind of know what that feeling is like. And for the people who are afraid of the bomb, which is what the scare was, it was fear of the bomb, was at home as we know it was at stake. And so the three characters in the book, and I'm still working on how to describe the book. I told this at dinner. It's early. I'm still trying to describe it in like just 2 seconds, because you're supposed to be able to do that as a writer. It's a little early. It's a little early yet. It's about 3 women who their lives are going to collide. They live on a cul-de-sac, and they're going to collide during this time of great fear. And the theme of displacement is going to be a part of all of them. So one of them is actually a displaced person from Eastern Europe. I don't know if you know this, but after the war, there were 1 million people in Germany brought in as forced labor who were displaced from home. They were called DPs, displaced persons. And there were displaced persons camps in Germany, 300 of them. And these people could not return home, or they would not return home. So let's say, for example, you are from Poland, and to go back home meant going back now to a place that was now an Eastern Bloc country, in the other communist rule. So they didn't want to go. So for a great many of these people, they didn't want to return to, and America took in 400,000 of them. And so this one woman is one of those people. So she's been displaced. Home for her is a memory. The other person is a blacklisted actress. She was on the cusp of superstardom, and she's young. She's only 24. And she doesn't even really know what a communist means. But in Hollywood in the 1950s, it was a huge deal. There are all kinds of people who were blacklisted. They were under suspicion of having communist ties or being communist sympathizers. And some of them probably did. There are a great many writers. Trumbo was one of them. But there are also a lot of people that they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time or were guilty by association. Like this gal, she doesn't even know what a communist bully is, really. She wasn't paying attention when all the war was going on because she was young. She's blacklisted now, so she's displaced from her career, which means everything to her. And the other person is just a woman who's taking care of her agoraphobic brother-in-law, who's a screenwriter for Hollywood. And she's been writing for him for years. And he dies. And she buries in the backyard.
Oh, hello.
She buries in the backyard.
We were plotting earlier.
Yeah.
Like,
and I don't know how to break that to the reader, but she doesn't.
You just did.
I knew. She's nowhere without him. She's living in his house. She's taking care of him. She actually also loves him. He's her dead husband's brother, but he's agoraphobe. He won't leave the house. And if he's dead, she has nothing. She has no job because she writes as a ghostwriter, which nobody does. And the house in Malibu where they're living is his. And so in a moment of desperation, when he actually takes an overdose of pills, she buries him. What's she gonna do? This is all facing displacement in different kinds of ways. And
especially the guy buried.
At some point, someone's gonna want to talk to the cool guy. He won't leave the house, but he
eventually,
you know. So that's what the book is about. Is about how are they going to recapture the sense of home and belonging and security.
So apparently, as usual, I'm very different from what these two are working on. I have a book coming in February. It's called Queens of London, and it is about the first all-female gang crime syndicate. 1925 London. It is led by Diamond Annie, who is the most notorious thief in UK history. She's one of my points of view. Another point of view is from the very first female chief inspector at Scotland Yard. And then I have an orphan on the run and a very clever shop clerk, and their lives collide. It's quite raucous. It's a very fun, fast-paced book. It's also a little bit gritty and a little bit tender, so there are moments. Great fun to write. I was just in London a week ago, kind of doing last-minute research and taking photos, and I went to Scotland Yard, which was super fun. The Crime Museum, and I spoke with the librarians there, read Lillian Wiles is my chief inspector. I read her memoir, and I ended up talking with them too. So it's very different from Strangers in the Night, as you can see. But lots of fun, and you get a lot of that 1920s London feel, which I think is
I bet they have whiskey. The two books.
They do whiskey, lots of gin. In the 20s in London, lots of gin and pints or more, but definitely there's still some Irish whiskey. Yeah, a good amount of Irish whiskey. But yeah, but a lot of fun, and characters who are all four women in very well. One of them is a 10-year-old girl, my orphan on the run, all looking for some way to create a new life for themselves. With the hand that they are dealt. And they all have had men sort of come in and out of their lives in different ways. Not all bad, some good, some bad. And they're trying to, get their own footing. And this is all during, there's the women's rights movement happening there. There's all kinds of stuff. It's after World War I. There are lots of Peaky Blinders. I'm pitching this as a female Peaky Blinders because you get a little bit of that going on too. There's a little bit of grit. So that's February, and this was a very, very fun book. Very excited about it. So up for pre-order. It's not here tonight, but I'm very excited about it. So all right. We have, since I am the master of ceremonies, Oh, I turned my watch off. Let's see. Okay, so we have 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll go into Celine. Does anyone have questions for us? Yes.
I just want to know how your parents lived during Strangers in the Night.
So my parents, yes. My grandparents especially. My grandmother would play Frank every Sunday. I actually put a little note in the author's note, actually, about how we would do mass and then go to my grandparents, and she would make lasagna or manicotti. My grandfather would put Frank on, he'd pour a little something brown in a glass with ice, and we would, yeah. So it very much, I dedicated it to the Duratorios, because how could I not? Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Over here?
Yes.
Other than each other, what historical fiction authors do you like to read?
So many.
Golly. I feel like, I've been reading so much nonfiction lately because so many books that I have not been delving as much into historical fiction as I would like. I would say wow.
I can give you 30.
Yeah, I can narrow it down to one.
No, I totally get it though.
Yeah, I'm like,
If you're in research mode, you really have the bandwidth.
I know all
yeah. But it's like, how do I narrow it down? But
Yeah. I can tell you what, I can give you time to think. So if Anne Patchett writes a book, I buy it.
Yes.
So I loved Tom Waits. I really did. And I know that Meryl Streep narrates that book. And if you're a fan of Meryl Streep, I hear it's wonderful. But I loved reading it because I heard Anne's voice in the story. I loved it. And The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese is it's stellar. And you got to commit to it. It's 800 pages, but I read it and also listened to it because he narrates it. So you're hearing his voice. So if you break it up with reading and listening, it's a great ride. And then I also just finished A Remarkably Bright Future.
Oh,
and I will never eat another octopus. No, I'm done. A good mussel, I will eat. No.
I think octopus.
Yeah. And so, and they're way too smart. It's like eating a dolphin. I'm just not gonna do it. Yeah. So those are my things. And anything Kate Morton writes too. Her latest came out a little while ago, but her latest is The Homecoming. Yeah, and if Kate Morton writes, I buy it. She's amazing.
Yeah, I'd say Kate Morton. I'd say Ariel Lawn. I love her stuff. She writes sort of thrillery historicals that are almost very interesting, off the beaten path kind of tales. Love her stuff. I love Erica Roebuck. She writes fast-paced fun. Michelle Moran. Loved Madame Tussaud. Was actually a real person, by the way. During the French Revolution. Wonderful book. Lauren Willig, right? Our friends. We have our friends out there.
I was just at a brunch with Lauren this morning in a great stuff here in New Jersey. And yes, her latest was really terrific. 2 Wars and a Wedding. That was not her title. But it's a great, I mean, sometimes I save Lauren's books for later in the summer once I'm done with all the busy. So I'm like, oh, it's Lauren, I'll get and I sat down, I was like, text her, I was like, Lauren, this is really good. She's like, wait, you read it now? And I'm like, I'm sorry. I didn't want to have anything else in my mind while I was reading, but it covers the 2 wars are the Greco-Turkish war and then followed by the second war is our main character gets involved in the Spanish-American War. So you get archaeology and the classics in Europe, and then you get just
something more interesting too. That's a little off this path.
Yes. So it's like sort of new, but we see again and again these themes of the women persevering over tremendous odds and all the sort of, the decks, I mean, the trials that her main character has to undergo to just dig, to participate in the archaeological dig in ancient Greece is just, we forget how short a time ago that was when it was, well, but then you would get dirty, and it's like, I can get dirty, it's okay. So yes, it's really a great read, especially if you want to move to a setting that is a little more off the beaten path.
I have lots of other
Yes. I have a question.
Okay, oh, good.
When you're writing historical fiction about Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner, they're so contemporary. There are people who knew them. There are
terrifying.
Right, there's daughters. So, like, what differentiates your book? Why is your book historical fiction instead of bio? And then how much license do you have as an artist to write maybe the most dramatic story you'd like to write?
All good questions. It's definitely terrifying. Because I just kept thinking, Nancy Sinatra is on Twitter. She's, I think, 83, 84, somewhere in that range. She's on Twitter, actively on Twitter. And I'm on Twitter, and I just thought, she's gonna find me. In terms of, you have to do your best to try to honor the facts as best you can. I'm not a nonfiction writer. So at the end of the day, your publisher, there's sort of an umbrella, a fiction umbrella that you fall under that, if there are changes made, it's the kind of thing where, legally you're in the clear, it's okay. But I try to be as close to the record as possible. If there's something I know I'm going to tweak, I throw it in the author's note. It's kind of the catch-all. I put him here in this salon at this time because of blah blah reasoning to tell the story, or I condensed this period because it was a whole lot of the same thing going on back and forth for 20 years, and so I stuck them in this one scene, even though it's really 10 years of it or whatever it is. So you're covered in terms of legalities. If they come at you, they're really kind of coming at the publisher, and the publisher's got you covered. But it doesn't make it less scary as an author. It's not just that you want to get it right, it's that I really want to honor these people. I mean, you end up forming a bond with these people. I mean, you form a bond with fictional characters as well, but when they really were alive, there's something about that, because I've written both biographical and non-biographical, and I have to say there's something really special about knowing these people are alive, that you connected to them on this soul level. At least you think, oh, that's the case. So you really try to do your best to honor their voice and the facts and to try to get it right. But you do have people in your corner legally, and they can still come after you. But somebody said bad press is not bad press. All press is good press. So if they did, I would be sweating buckets, but everybody else would be like, no, I have to go buy this book. So I don't know. It's somewhere in there. Can I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You guys were wonderful. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank all of you so much. That was wonderful. Again, if you haven't had a chance to get your copy of their books, we have them available at the registers on this side, as well as at the registers around the corner. And we will be having the signing line around the corner as well. So I will usher you guys over there, and I'm just going to get your books. Thank you.